To understand the role and the importance of QUBIS, I think you have to understand the context. We work in Northern Ireland is a challenged economy, low startup economy, a low equity market economy, and QUBIS plays into all of those. So our core business is to create deep tech startups. And in terms of the importance of that, there's a couple of data points I'd point to. So if you look at the innovation clusters in Northern Ireland, this is research from British Business Bank, we're twice as dependent on startups in those innovation clusters. Those startups unusually heavily come from spin-outs from Queen's through QUBIS, and that's backed up some of the research that we've done around the iCure program. So 50% of the deep tech startups in the last 5 years came out of Queen's. So it has a very important impact on the local economy in terms of addressing that deficit. If you look at the equity position, again, Northern Ireland, floats to the bottom in terms of equity activity in UK, but QUBIS is the third most active early stage investor in Northern Ireland. In fact, if you look at it as a private investor, we're probably the number one most active deep tech early stage investor. So we play an important role in addressing some of the deficits in the local economy. I think the first thing is QUBIS is one of the OGs of the tech transfer world. I mean, that's part of the reason we're having this 40th celebration. We've been around 40 years. We've kind of got our eye in. We know what we're doing. And part of that success is institutional support from Queen's. It's really important that Queen's has supported QUBIS over the years. They supported it in practical ways, serious investment in the development fund to help invest in companies before we started investing off balance sheet, supporting staff and all sorts of facilities. So that institutional support is really critical for what QUBIS has done, but balancing that out with entrepreneurial support. So it's an independent company, has its own board, and you look at some of the chairs, the board members of the investment committee, and the impact they have on keeping us real and keeping us commercial and agile is really, really very critical. So that's the second factor. I think the third factor I'd put down to staff. We've been looking to retain some very excellent members of staff. Many of them have been with us for a good period of time. We've refreshed that with some new blood. So I think it's that combination of institutional support, independent thinking from around the board, and some really good staff. There's a consistency in terms of the approach from QUBIS. So it hasn't changed that much. There's been some organisational change in terms of how we employ people through the independent company, through the university, etc. But what has been consistent has been that entrepreneurial input from our board. And if you like, what has changed is the way that we assess the market. So a core thread of what we've always done is to make sure that the startups, the spin-outs that we create are addressing a market need. Now, we've done that through JVs, we've done that through recruiting the right kind of leadership into it. Now we've sort of locked onto this customer discovery process and our alliance with Innovate UK and our role in running iCure. So if you like, that's a honing and improvement of that process of trying to identify what the market needs. So in some ways, it's a change, it's important development, but in many ways it's just a consistent strategy that QUBIS has always applied. How important has QUBIS been to the local, national and global economies? I think the first one is easier to say. I mean, you can see that in the stats. You look at the British Business Bank data, you look at the London Economics Unit data. Take that last one. It's evident that the spin-out activity in terms of economic impact exceeds the research activity in Queen's, which was a bit of a surprise to me, which shows how important it is. Obviously, it's dependent. They're related to each other. You can see it in the BBB report, regional tracker, where Northern Ireland is heavily dependent on startups. Those startups are heavily dependent on our spin-out activity. So you see it very concretely in Northern Ireland. Clearly, if you go to a UK-wide level, it gets diluted a little bit. We're one player amongst 120 universities, many other active agents in that economy. But you can point to things like iCure. We're a hub. It's not typical for Northern Ireland to play that UK hub role, and we play that. So we support 120 odd institutions in their commercialisation activity. So you can point to that as a very practical impact on the UK economy. In terms of the global economy, again, that gets diluted further. We're a tiny little speck in terms of the global economy. But you could probably pick out various technologies. I think about, there's various license deals that we've done, porcine diseases, where we've had a very fundamental, almost blockbuster role in terms of curing disease within the pig industry, pork industry. You can point to, if you've got an Android phone on you, you can look at aptX and some of the compression technologies, etc., which are probably still being running on devices that people carry. So even if you take it out, pan out to a global level, there'll be specific technologies that have arisen from Queen's and being commercialised through QUBIS. The biggest challenges at QUBIS, I think that comes back to the fact that we're working the hard yards. This isn't the golden triangle. This isn't the most developed economy in the UK. Part of our challenge, that's what we're trying to do, is to try and improve its standing in the UK and across the island of Ireland. But we still have a very low level of equity activity, and we probably also have quite limited entrepreneurial capacity. There's not many people live in Northern Ireland, and that constrains the number of entrepreneurs you can pull into your activities. So getting access to capital, getting access to entrepreneurs are the biggest challenges. I'm probably going to come back to iCure as one of the solutions to that, but it's clear we also need to develop alliances across the island of Ireland, across the UK, to draw in more entrepreneurial capital. And it's probably clear also that we need to develop a fund, a new deep tech fund. We haven't done that yet, but that's one of the challenges I think that we need to address. So what achievements am I most proud of at QUBIS? There's always individual companies that I'm really proud of that we struggled to get off the ground, that were difficult in birthing, if you like, and some of those that I've had a particular hand in have been turned around and have been very successful. I was a bit loath to name check them because I get accused of favouritism, so I'll probably swerve that and go for the Octopus Ventures report. So a couple of 3 years ago, Octopus Ventures decided to run a ranking which was based on a whole series of metrics which essentially got to the question of efficiency. If you gave QUBIS £1, what would it return to the economy, and particularly to investors? And that looked at, compared us against all the universities in the UK, 120 or so. And surprisingly to many, not to me because I've been tracking the data for years and knew how efficient we are, we ranked #1, so above Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, etc. There's a bit of surprise around that. It made Forbes at the time. People wanted to know how a Northern Irish university had bested all of these prestigious universities, but it was based on 10 years worth of data, and it really was a measure of efficiency, how lean and efficient we were in terms of turning IP into something of value. They waited a couple of years, they ran it again, probably hoping for a different outcome. We came #1 again. They run it a third time after a bit of delay, and we dropped down to number 2. But still, that's it's pretty good going for an institution the size of Queen's and in the economy that we're working in. Keeping in place some of the strengths, that institutional support sort of referred to, that's absolutely critical. We're very dependent on research and IP that comes out of Queen's. We're very dependent on maintaining that entrepreneurial leadership from our board. Very proud of the chairship and the membership of the boards that we've had. They've really made a difference, and we have to constantly keep refreshing that. So people come in and they play a pro bono role. We don't pay them, so it's a testament to how supportive they are of Queen's, QUBIS and the Northern Irish economy. So we need to keep refreshing that. That's really important. The team's important. So retaining the talent that we've got in the team. I think to make it really work, we need to keep our eye on improving that equity market position. That's why I keep referring to the desire to create a new fund, or at least to pull the choke out in terms of our off-balance sheet investing. And then just keep using all the tools, keep remaining at the forefront of best practice, innovation best practice. For me at the moment, that's customer discovery process that we use through iCure, but I'm sure new things will come to the fore in terms of best practice in the future. It's keeping at the cutting edge of that for me. So what are my hopes for the future? So it's a double-edged sword, this one for me actually, because I would quite like to be able to maintain QUBIS as that most efficient tech transfer organisation. I'd like to get back to that #1 ranking from #2 in terms of the Octopus rankings. But in many ways, that efficiency and that drive is a reflection of the fact that we are working to overcome certain deficits in the local economy. And actually, I'd like to see those disappear. I'd like to see an economy in Northern Ireland which is active in terms of equities, active in terms of tech startups. And so not as much falls on QUBIS to play, the role that it plays, that there's more players in the ecosystem. And so if you like, I think that probably resolved itself in one answer, which is I think a more collaborative engagement with other players in the ecosystem. You're starting to see that with the REAP, Northern Ireland REAP programme. We're working with lots of other stakeholders. And I think that's probably the key to it, is a more balanced economy where QUBIS is playing an important role, but is working collaboratively with others. In my opinion, it starts with, is there a market need, I think. I mean, maybe before that we're basing this on IP and technology from a university. So there's always the question of, does this tech work? So there's, technical due diligence, that's kind of taken for granted. The big challenge for us is making sure that there's a need for it in the market. Does it address a pain or provide a gain in the marketplace? And that's harder to achieve. And I think that's the thing that we've made the biggest step forward. The whole customer discovery process, the journey around iCure, helps us get some inkling as to whether there's a role for this technology in the market. And if you look at all the data, that's where most startups fail, because they hadn't really got an understanding of whether there's a role for this in the market. It's spin-outs in particular, if I distinguish that from startups, if they're coming out of the university research base, they're not necessarily being born with experienced entrepreneurial leadership. We've got some very bright people. We have some good programs for helping them grow into entrepreneurial roles. But I think we also need to build a team out and inject some entrepreneurial leadership into those. So that's the same. So market, team, and those are the two factors then generally tend to unlock the potential to get capital, to grow things. These are very capital intensive. Particularly if you're working in the life sciences, you need to be able to draw in quite a lot of resource, be that equity investment or grant funding. But if you get those right, if you get a good idea that attacks the market, people can see there's evidence that it has a role in the market, has potential to grow. So, the market size obviously important. You get the right team, you get the right balance. And you can see often one of the failure points in early stage startups is just the wrong dynamics in the team. You fall apart. Address both of those, and you're likely to increase your chances of generating significant resource through investment. Many other things. You've got to get the regulatory pathway right, you've got to get your IP strategy right, but those are the key fundamentals in terms of what makes a spin-out work.